Before we begin, if you're liking this kind of content, please remember to give the video a thumbs up. Your support means a great deal to this channel. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you're alerted whenever we post new content. The fall season of 1908 had brushed the New England landscape with hues of gold and deep red. On the fringe of Providence, Rhode Island, inside a simple home, a man named Samuel Mitchell, who made his living as a photographer, was arranging his studio for a session that would later become one of the most talked-about portraits of its time. The lady who arrived that afternoon was Margaret Thornton, aged 34, her countenance showing the gentle strength of a person who had faced difficulty with unwavering composure. Cradled in her arms was her newborn son, Thomas, just 3 months of age, a baby welcomed after many years of yearning and sorrow. Samuel Mitchell had earned a reputation across Providence for his painstaking dedication to his craft. His pictures were more than simple photographs. They were thoughtfully constructed stories, with every component placed with clear intention. The daylight of the late afternoon streamed through the studio's large windows, creating gentle, filtered shadows that appeared to softly embrace his subjects instead of falling upon them with severity. Margaret held little Thomas with the safeguarding affection found only in a mother. Her face was calm, nearly tranquil, a notable difference from the struggles that had defined her earlier days. The child was asleep, his small, delicate face relaxed in that blissful unawareness particular to newborns. Samuel made small adjustments to their posture, circling them with experienced exactness, making certain the final arrangement would seize not only their likenesses, but the profound feeling of the occasion. The image was captured using the glass plate methods common for that time, a lengthy procedure demanding complete lack of movement from those being photographed. For almost half a minute, Margaret and Thomas did not stir, their shapes permanently recorded by the reaction of light with chemical emulsion. Samuel felt he had preserved something truly authentic that day, a mother's devotion made permanent in silver and albumen. The portrait was processed using the normal techniques of the day. Margaret returned to retrieve it 1 week afterwards, and upon seeing the final product, she began to cry. It was flawless, she explained. It was precisely what she had wanted, an enduring memento of this invaluable time with her boy. For 9 decades, the portrait stayed in relative obscurity. It moved from Margaret's family to sellers of antiquities, and later to individual enthusiasts, each one ignorant of the oddity concealed inside the picture. The photo was merely categorized as an interesting relic from the early 1900s, a skillfully arranged picture of a mother and her baby, and nothing else. However, in 1998, the entire situation was transformed. A historian and photographer by the name of Dr. Elizabeth Ashford was sorting through an assortment of antique pictures obtained from a Boston estate auction. While she inspected every photo with a magnifying lens, comparing them against historical documents, her attention was drawn to the Mitchell portrait. Initially, it appeared ordinary, a technically sound photo from the Edwardian era, but as she shifted her magnifying glass, scrutinizing the specifics with the focus of an expert trained to notice the smallest changes in illumination and shade, she noticed something that caused her to pause. In Margaret's right hand, which was supporting the infant's back, there was a distinct gleam. It was faint, nearly invisible, but undoubtedly there. Dr. Ashford tilted the photograph to various positions, studied it under different lamps, and each time the gleam persisted. What was visible within that gleam defied logic. It appeared to be a shape, but not Margaret's own. That would have been easily explained as a simple mirrored image. No, the shape within the gleam was different. It was more shadowy, more commanding, and its appearance seemed warped in a manner that contradicted any reasonable understanding of how light and dark should interact with human skin. Dr. Ashford reached out to her peers at the Rhode Island Historical Society. She sent the photograph to be studied by modern imaging specialists. What ensued was a series of inquiries, each one more baffling than the one before. The image was analyzed by experts in the history of photography, in the science of optics, and in anomalous events. Many ideas were put forward. Some proposed it was a flaw from the photographic process, a typical issue with the old plates where contaminants or scratches could produce strange shapes. Others put forward the idea of a double exposure, though inspection of the original glass plate revealed no signs of a second image. A few quietly spoke of explanations that lay beyond the realm of conventional reason. Yet Dr. Ashford had uncovered something further. Within the Providence Historical Archives, she located Margaret Thornton's personal journal, and what she read there would intensify the enigma significantly. Margaret's writings were brief but telling. She wrote of Thomas's arrival. She wrote of her happiness. But she also wrote of unusual events, of times when she sensed another presence in her home, of shades that appeared to shift on their own, of the feeling of unseen eyes upon her as she held her son. One journal entry, dated a mere fortnight before the portrait was taken, was especially unsettling. I sensed it once more today. That heavy feeling, that dark shape, it is never far from Thomas. Samuel believes I have lost my mind, but I am certain of what I experience. It guards him. Or maybe it is laying a claim to him. I cannot decide which idea terrifies me more. The portrait session occurred merely days after that diary was written, and in that brief instant, as Samuel Mitchell's camera seized the light, another presence was seized as well, a presence that had no right to be there, a presence that Margaret might have sensed was approaching. To comprehend the meaning behind that strange gleam, we must travel back to the year 1905, a full 3 years before the portrait was made. Margaret Thornton had not always been the composed woman pictured in Mitchell's studio. In her younger days, she had been full of life, driven, and resolved to break free from the stifling conventions imposed on a woman of her social standing. She had pursued knowledge independently, was an insatiable reader, and nurtured ambitions of becoming an author or an academic, careers considered wholly inappropriate for her gender. Yet destiny, as it frequently will, had a different design. At 25, Margaret was introduced to and wed Robert Thornton, a banker of good reputation and substantial fortune. The union had been arranged, following the custom of the time, but Margaret had persuaded herself that love would eventually develop. Robert was not cruel. He was merely remote, consumed by his financial dealings, viewing his wife much as one would view a fine decorative object, something to be kept in good condition, but not deeply connected to. For 7 long years, Margaret resided in the Thornton Manor on Benefit Street, slowly feeling her spirit smothered by the burden of social duty and monotonous routine. She organized formal suppers. She was present at philanthropic events. She executed the part of the elegant spouse with such skill that almost no one could have detected the profound despair hiding beneath her obedient exterior. Then the year 1905 arrived, and with it, the passing of Margaret's younger sister, Catherine. Catherine had been just 19, spirited and untamed in ways Margaret had never allowed herself to be. She had danced with inappropriate suitors, consumed controversial books, laughed with unchecked volume, and held far too little regard for social conventions. Then, abruptly, she was gone. Claimed by pneumonia during a harsh winter, her life ended before it could properly blossom. Margaret attended the burial in a numb state of disbelief. As Catherine's casket was descended into the icy earth, Margaret felt something fracture within her. It was as if the meticulously built walls of her restrained life had collapsed, and something immense and wild was struggling to get out. That very night, Margaret did something unprecedented. She ventured into the woodland behind the Thornton property, alone, with no goal other than to feel the winter's chill on her skin and the sharp press of fallen pine under her feet. The woods were thick and black, the sort of place where the laws of polite society held no power. She had not planned to travel so deep, but the forest appeared to pull her inward, the trail growing fainter with every stride. She soon understood she had no idea where she was. But instead of panic, she was filled with another sensation, a peculiar feeling of liberation, as though by losing her physical path, she had also shed the spiritual chains that had confined her for so long. It was there, in that deepening woodland gloom, that she came across a presence. She never gave a clear description of it to anyone, not even within the pages of her journal. But in her later writings, she called it the Watcher, the Shade, the entity that observes. Whatever its true nature, it altered something essential in her perception of reality. After that fateful night, Margaret returned to the manor, a changed person. Not outwardly, her conduct stayed faultless. Her portrayal of the perfect wife remained impeccable. But inside, a fundamental shift had occurred. She felt watched. She felt as if she now belonged to something else. In a matter of weeks, she discovered she was with child. It appeared to be a divine blessing. After 7 childless years of marriage, a baby would finally secure her position, would finally grant her existence a sense of meaning. Robert was overjoyed. The domestic staff began readying the house for an heir. Margaret carried the child with a peculiar combination of elation and apprehension. The pregnancy itself was arduous. She suffered from intense, lifelike, bad dreams. She would awaken breathless, certain a figure had been looming beside her bed. She experienced persistent feelings of invisible fingers touching her, not with aggression, but with a sense of ownership. She knew with an unshakable, inexplicable certainty that this pregnancy was not entirely of this world. When Thomas was finally born in the spring of 1908, Margaret gazed into her infant son's eyes and saw a flicker of cognizance, a gleam of understanding that seemed far too old for a newborn. She loved him with a fierce, desperate love and would have sacrificed her life for him without a second thought. But she also feared him, feared what he might represent, feared the force that had willed him into being. It was to immortalize this complex chapter of her life, this collision of a mother's devotion and a profound, spiritual fear, that Margaret had walked into Samuel Mitchell's studio on that autumn day. She had desired confirmation. She had sought tangible proof that the sensations she felt were real, that her mind was not, in fact, betraying her. She had clung to the hope that the camera, that marvel of scientific progress, might record the truth only she could perceive. And in a certain sense, it had. The scrutiny surrounding the portrait grew more intense throughout 1998 and continued into 1999. Dr. Elizabeth Ashford developed a deep fixation on the picture, propelled by a belief that this enigma held a significant truth about the very fabric of existence. She commenced a meticulous investigation into Margaret Thornton's life. She spoke with the Thornton family's descendants, some of whom were hesitant to talk about their ancestry. She pored over archives containing birth announcements, wedding licenses, and period medical files, and slowly, a deeply disturbing narrative began to form. Thomas Thornton, Margaret's boy, had experienced a lengthy and successful life. He grew into an esteemed industrialist, took a wife, raised a family, and lived to an advanced age. By every standard measure, he had been an ordinary, unexceptional person, and yet individuals who had been close to him recounted odd quirks. His wife, Emma, had maintained a personal diary. Within its pages, she portrayed her husband as caring yet emotionally removed, physically there but somehow separate, as though a core piece of his being existed in another place. She wrote of his eerie capacity to be aware of information he could not have learned normally, of visions he said he had experienced simultaneously with faraway family members, of instances when the look on his face would transform completely, becoming something old and alien. Their offspring, Thomas's direct descendants, relayed comparable impressions. They depicted their father as not entirely normal, as an observer, physically present, but spiritually distant. One granddaughter, speaking with Dr. Ashford in 1999, shared a thought that gave the researcher pause. "Grandfather was always kind to us, but I felt like we were specimens he was examining, as if he was attempting to comprehend what it meant to be human just by watching us." Dr. Ashford probed further into the historical archives, seeking any record of strange events linked to the Thornton family. Her discoveries were inconclusive, yet highly suggestive. Local periodicals made mention of bizarre happenings, a blaze that started close to the Thornton home but unaccountably died out before reaching it, a sickness that infected the local community but completely bypassed the Thornton youngsters, a sequence of happenstances so statistically unlikely they verged on the supernatural. She also located Margaret's personal journal, which had been given to the Rhode Island Historical Society by her family. In it, Margaret recounted her ordeals with poetic yet chilling lucidity. One especially powerful entry, composed when Thomas was 2 years of age, stated, He comprehends concepts beyond his years. Just yesterday he gazed right at me and uttered, in a tone not entirely his, "I did not wish to scare you, Mother. I am learning how to exist." What could he possibly mean? How can a toddler form words with such deliberate meaning? And yet, the moment Robert entered, Thomas fell silent, engaging with his playthings like any other little boy. Am I truly alone in witnessing this? Am I the sole person who realizes what he truly is? Dr. Ashford sought opinions from psychiatrists, investigators of the paranormal, and scholars of esoteric history. The hypotheses put forward grew more and more conjectural. Some put forth the idea that Margaret had suffered from a type of psychosis following childbirth, that she had displaced her own fears onto her son, constructing a story of otherworldly influence. Others argued that the gleam in the portrait was merely a flaw from the old photographic process, and that Margaret's diary musings were the inventions of an unwell psyche. But Dr. Ashford remained skeptical. Her entire professional life had been dedicated to examining photography and its connection to factual accuracy and human interpretation. She understood both how cameras documented reality and how readily they could be tricked. And as she studied that gleam, she perceived something that did not align with any common photographic defect or trick of the light. The gleam displayed deliberate thought. It displayed clear objective. It displayed something that seemed to be conscious. Dr. Ashford started researching ancient legends and mythic tales, seeking historical precedents for Margaret's ordeal. She discovered countless reports from various cultures and eras about women who had interactions with otherworldly beings in woodlands or transitional spaces, and who later gave birth to children who seemed to occupy a space between two worlds. These children, in every story, were characterized as intellectually gifted, deeply insightful, and essentially set apart by their unique nature. In Celtic lore, there were accounts of fairy replacements and children touched by the fae. In the folklore of Germanic regions, narratives of elves and spectral entities who sired children with human women. Among indigenous American cultures, legends of creatures from different dimensions who would sometimes assume human shape or produce heirs. Were all of these simply different expressions of a single recurring event? Was Margaret's story merely another example of a design recurring throughout human history? Or were they just the frantic efforts of troubled individuals to rationalize profound grief and misfortune? If this story is engaging you, please show your support with a like and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement is incredibly helpful to me. Feel free to leave a comment below with your own theory about the true events of this story. By the turn of the millennium, Dr. Ashford had compiled an exhaustive dossier concerning the Mitchell portrait and the Thornton lineage. She had spoken with specialists across numerous fields, conferred with record keepers and historical scholars, and gathered her conclusions into a formal manuscript that was as academically thorough as it was deeply disquieting in its suggestions. However, it was in the final stages of this investigation that she uncovered a detail that would push the enigma to a new level. While reviewing microfilmed copies of Providence newsprint from 1908, she discovered a small, overlooked item tucked away in the later sections. It was a police bulletin, concise and mysterious, detailing a disturbance at the residence of Samuel Mitchell, the photographer. As per the bulletin, Mitchell had suffered a severe mental collapse not long after processing the Thornton portrait. He had ruined the majority of his glass plates, stating that something was not right with them. He had completely given up his profession in photography and lived out his days in total seclusion. Even more compelling, the bulletin noted that Mitchell had sought counsel from a local man of the cloth regarding the affair. Dr. Ashford managed to find the corresponding church documents, which contained a short memo written by the priest. Mr. Mitchell showed me a most troubling picture. He insisted it had captured an entity that ought not to be captured. I recommended he devote himself to prayer and abandon his inquiries into affairs that transcend mortal comprehension. I have faith he will heed this advice. The priest was named Father Cornelius Walsh. Dr. Ashford learned that Walsh had carried out his entire religious service in Providence, and that he had bequeathed a set of private writings, including personal diaries, which were currently stored in the Brown University archives. What she read within those diaries was remarkable. Father Walsh had kept scrupulous notes on what he deemed to be preternatural or abnormal events reported by his congregation. Among these notes was a comprehensive account of his conversation with Samuel Mitchell. Walsh had personally studied the portrait and had written down his impressions. The picture is unsettling in a manner I find difficult to describe. It presents as a straightforward likeness, a mother and infant arranged with the ability of a talented artist. And yet, a component exists within the picture that generates a powerful feeling of incorrectness upon the mother's hand. I discern what looks to be the gleam or silhouette of a shape that has no place being there. Mr. Mitchell is convinced it is a preternatural manifestation. I am leaning toward agreement, though I cannot comprehend its origin or its objective. Walsh had subsequently detailed his own inquiries into the Thornton family and Margaret's experiences. It seemed he had tried to converse with Margaret directly, but reported that she had declined to speak of it, maintaining it was a private family issue. Most astonishingly, Walsh had written, "I have formed the belief that the event which transpired in that woodland was neither of hellish nor heavenly origin, but something completely separate, a force that functions according to rules we cannot grasp and must not measure by our own moral scales. The child resulting from this convergence seems to be the junction between two separate states of existence. Whether this constitutes a benediction or a malediction, I am unable to decide. I surrender this matter to God's wisdom." Dr. Ashford found herself at a standstill. She had revealed a mountain of indirect testimony pointing toward a genuinely anomalous event, one that had impacted several witnesses across separate eras and backgrounds, and yet the proof was inherently unclear. It could be seen as authentic proof of a supernormal incident, or it could be rejected as the shared fantasy of psychologically vulnerable or gullible people. The portrait itself stayed the core puzzle. Contemporary examination had detected no signs of manipulation or a dual image. The gleam was unquestionably part of the original plate, and yet no scientific study could clarify how the gleam had been created or what it signified. Dr. Ashford chose to put her findings before the scholarly world. In 2001, she released a formal article titled "Anomalous Imagery and Historical Evidence," a study of the 1908 Mitchell portrait. The paper was met with divided opinions. Some peers commended her detailed methodology and considered analysis. Others rejected it as fringe science, an effort to manufacture proof of the paranormal where there was none to be found. But the article drew notice from outside university circles. Researchers of the unexplained reached out to Dr. Ashford. Followers of mysterious phenomena asked for reproductions of the picture. Digital forums emerged, dedicated to debating its potential meanings. The image that had been forgotten for 90 years abruptly became the focus of intense examination and public intrigue, and individuals started posing queries that no one was equipped to resolve. And what, precisely, was the essence of the force she felt within her own child? Many years have now gone by since Dr. Elizabeth Ashford first came across the Mitchell portrait. The picture has since been featured in numerous television specials, written about in endless publications, and debated extensively in online forums. Hypotheses continue to multiply. Our technological tools have improved, permitting ever more granular examination of the initial glass plate, and still, the core puzzle persists without a clear solution. Some analysts have put forward logical interpretations. It is possible Margaret was afflicted by a then unnamed psychological condition. It is possible the gleam is the product of a rare chemical interaction that occurred during the development stage. It is possible the entire mythology built upon this picture is an intricate fabrication, a tale we have woven together to give meaning to a fundamentally ambiguous visual. Other individuals insist that a truly unexplainable event took place. They highlight the uniformity of the testimonies from various origins and decades. They contend that the gleam signifies an entity existing outside our present scientific knowledge, a phenomenon that questions our fundamental beliefs about consciousness and the fabric of the universe. But maybe the most disquieting potential is that the actual fact resides in a space between these two opposing views. Perhaps Margaret's encounter was with a tangible presence, yet one that operates outside the confines of labels like paranormal or supernatural. Perhaps there are entire states of existence, other planes of reality, that sometimes brush against our own. Perhaps the gleam in the portrait freezes one such point of contact, an instant where a being from a different stratum of reality briefly materialized in our own. Thomas Thornton lived a complete life. He was recognized as a prosperous industrialist, a committed father, and a valued member of his town. Those acquainted with him characterized him as eccentric, yet undeniably human. The official historical documents contain no indication that he was anything other than a standard man leading a standard life. And yet, his most intimate relations reported that very same sensation of strangeness, that impression of being scrutinized, that perception of a consciousness which appeared to stretch past the limits of ordinary human thought. Margaret herself lived to be 76. She never spoke openly of her ordeal. She never confirmed the peculiarities that others around her seemed to notice. In her personal journal, the entries grew less common as she grew older. The final one, penned in 1935, was short and cryptic. "I see the truth now. He does not mean us ill. He is here to observe and to understand. What he will ultimately become is shaped not by his origin, but by the lessons we provide him." Perhaps that is the reality for every one of us. We are echoes of those who raised us. We are glimpses of the people we might have been. The portrait itself is now kept in a carefully controlled storage facility. It is inspected from time to time by investigators, scanned with the most advanced equipment available, yet no conclusive answer for the gleam upon Margaret's hand has ever been confirmed. The original photographic plate survives, still displaying that same unaccountable silhouette. So, we are left with our uncertainties. What was the entity Margaret met in that wooded area? What power was responsible for Thomas Thornton's conception? And what does the gleam in that 1908 picture truly depict? Perhaps it is the manifestation of a genuinely otherworldly force, a visitor from a separate dimension, an intelligence that functions under principles we cannot grasp. Perhaps it is a psychological artifact, an externalization of Margaret's troubled psyche, given form through the unique chemistry of early photography. Perhaps it is something different altogether, a phenomenon that fits into no established box of understanding. Or maybe the most troubling answer is the most straightforward. Perhaps it is precisely what it seems to be, a reflection of something that was genuinely present, something that resists explanation for the simple reason that our current models of reality are insufficient to contain it. Margaret Thornton gazed at her son and saw an entity she could not define. She brought him to a photographer's studio and permitted that instant to be sealed in time. In that fleeting moment, as light imprinted itself upon a glass plate, a presence that had no place being there emerged, and over 100 years later, we are still striving to comprehend what that presence was. The photograph endures, the questions endure, and in the gleam captured upon Margaret's hand, something continues to observe. Its true nature as enigmatic and elusive, now as it was on that crisp autumn day in 1908. If you enjoyed this exploration, please share your perspective in the comments. I am very interested to hear your interpretations and to address anything you're curious about. And if you are not yet subscribed, now is a great moment to do so. Click the subscribe button and enable notifications to be sure you catch all of our future investigations into the unknown.